It was almost 3 years ago to the day that I first saw this place with my own eyes. Chris Burkhart and Ben Weiland led a crew of us on a surf trip for Surfer magazine. We drove through forests looking for new surf breaks, drank incredible vodka, ate too many Cliff Bars, suffered mild hypothermia, and were on high alert for large furry mammals. The crown jewel of the trip was a wave Ben spotted on Google Earth years earlier. We all pitched in and hired a helicopter to fly us in. It was near flat when we arrived, but the little waves we did see were enough to let our imaginations run wild. We were only there for less than an hour, but we fished the pristine river which opened to the tiny waves and caught enough silver salmon for a feast. The only person for many miles was an old man whose job was to guard the river mouth from poachers. His dog sniffed us as he fed us berries and told us of rare days when the waves got big. In the years since, I've obsessed about returning to share the old man's story and surf the seemingly perfect waves that peeled into his secret cove. It would need a special swell because the waves were well protected by a giant headland to the south. 3 summers later, saw an unusual number of hurricanes tracking westerly through the Pacific. This was the year of all years to go back. We arrived in the city of Petrolovsk. This is the port that held the majority of the Soviet nuclear submarines throughout the Cold War. Kamchatka is 7 time zones east of Moscow and only 600 miles north of Japan. Its people are a mix of ex-Soviet soldiers and indigenous tribes who warm the winter months with vodka and family. The vast majority of the Kamchatkan surf has never been explored because there are no roads. Endless waves await if you have access to a tank or helicopter. But tanks take days, even weeks, to travel short distances, and the swells are fickle and tough to forecast. At least 1 helicopter crashes per season. They're basically old war relics brought to life by private pilots for fistfuls of cash provided by tourists like us. I came back here with my friends Dylan Gordon and Anna Ehrgott, 2 surf-obsessed Californians unafraid to risk life and limb for a couple uncrowded lefts and a good time. Also on the trip was Kamchatka's first surfer, Anton Morozov. Anton learned to surf by watching the Hollywood surf film In God's Hands. We met on the last trip, and I was stoked he was able to come along. The pilots laughed at our assortment of surfboards, film equipment, electric bear fencing, fishing gear, cameras, and supplies as we crammed them into the small cabin. Our plan was to get dropped off for the remainder of the swell and potentially stay for the following swell a week away. What makes Kamchatka so appealing is its remoteness. Surf breaks around the world have become developed and more crowded, but the dream of surfing perfect waves with no one but your friends remains the same. After being dropped off by the helicopter, we were immediately hit with a storm of mosquitoes, yellow jackets, and stinging gnats. Instead of walking to check the surf, we rushed to get camp set up so we could hide from the bugs and secure our stuff from bears. Kamchatka is home to a unique bear that is larger than North American grizzly bears. I bought a bear-proof fence on the internet, which turned out to be only a few fiberglass rods holding a thin rope powered by a couple D-cell batteries. We were told not to bring guns, that guns only made these bears more angry. We walked up the sandbar to get a clear view of the waves. The swell was smaller than forecasted. Only a few waves came through that didn't end up on dry sand. With the swell dying, it was clear our only chance to surf would have to be before the sun went down. The water was barely 50 degrees, and it was small and thumping on the shallow sandbar, but I was finally surfing the wave I dreamed about. Anna went to the beach to grab this video of me surfing. As the sun set, we went back to camp to start a fire and cook dinner. I cast into the river but got nothing. Later, in the moonlight, a tall, shadowy figure approached us. He told us that he belonged to a group of fishermen camped across the river. He handed us a rusty, over-under shotgun with a single buckshot round in the chamber. Bears, he said, were bad around here. He summoned Anton, and the two walked off in the darkness. The next morning, probably 10 ex-military looking men passed us on the river. Some smiled, and others grimaced. Anton told me that the men were poachers. The man last night told him they originally thought we were police and cut all their salmon nets when we arrived. Poaching, especially at the scale of their operation, was highly illegal in Russia. Sitting around the fire, I began to think. Anna was probably the first woman they'd seen in months. The man came back the next morning to retrieve the gun. It was obviously just a way to meet us and see if we would rat them out. If they'd really cared for our safety, they would have left the gun. There were no fish in the river and no bears. The old man I came back to see was nowhere to be found. Perhaps he was murdered, perhaps he ran away. With no way of knowing how good the next swell would be, it wasn't worth testing the situation any further. I called the helicopter with the satellite phone and we packed up camp. The distant whir of chopper blades were like music to our ears. Our lifeline to the outside world had arrived. Watching the mountains and valleys unfold below us, I realized how lucky we were. They had over a month left in their salmon season, and if they'd killed us, they'd have had to move camp to avoid police following up on our whereabouts. If we'd have come a month later, when they'd had nothing to stay for, it could have been a much different story. I thought again about that cove, whether the next swell would hit there, and whether the old man was still alive. Maybe some adventures end in more questions than answers.